He was ordering a steak and he said, "Est-ce que je peux avoir des salopes, s'il vous plaît?" So he said basically, "May I have some hookers, please, instead of some steaks?" I think the most important point here is the fact that cramming is not very useful unless you want to pass a test, to make it personal and to add emotions. What is the most frustrating part of learning a language? You guessed it. It's vocabulary. You forget it. You confuse it. And when you finally need it, poof, it's gone. Hey, it's Luca here. I'm a language lover, coach, and entrepreneur, and I've been learning 14 foreign languages over the last 34 years and teaching thousands of learners across the world. And let me tell you, vocabulary is the number one obstacle that stands between understanding a language and actually using it fluently and confidently. So why this video and why now? Well, I've been binging on Till's videos and I knew I had to dive into this one. Till has a brilliant way of breaking things down, and in this video I want to add my own experience and insights both as a language learner and as a language coach. I'm going to break down what Till says, add what works from my own personal learning and coaching experience, and give you actionable steps you can use today to, for example, understand how vocabulary is actually acquired, memorize it more effectively, and most importantly, use it in a way that feels natural, fun, and rewarding for you. And if you want to go even deeper, I've put together a free workbook called Acquire Vocabulary in 5 Simple Steps, which contains some more great stuff to make your vocabulary retention great. You will find it in the pinned comment below, as well as in the description box below this video. Go grab it. All right, let's get into it and make vocabulary finally click for you.
Your brain is fascinating when it comes to remembering words. Some stick immediately and stay forever, while others seem impossible to remember no matter how often you review them. The forgetting curve, spaced repetition, context-dependent memory, passive and active vocabulary. There is a lot we will get into today. And at the end of it all, you will make any word stick as easily as curse words do. Yes.
That sounds like a great presentation, a great introduction, and a pretty juicy one at that. So let's see what this video is going to bring.
There's a reason why these are usually the first words we learn in any language. In this video we look at why you remember some words and not others, and lots of strategies to solve that problem to get your language skills to the next level. After all, vocabulary is probably the most decisive factor for understanding and holding conversations.
This is a great point. If you think about it, language learning is made of many things: pronunciation, grammar, words, etc. But come to think of it, words are the most important thing, the most important factor. Think about when it comes to understanding someone who's talking to you, or when you want to get your point across. If someone is talking to you, let's say that you're learning Spanish, and the guy says something on the lines of "Quiero ir a Roma la próxima semana" or "la semana próxima." If you understand Roma próxima semana, just 2 words, 2 or 3 words out of 7 or 8, you will understand the concept also from context. Oh, this guy wants to go to Rome. And the same thing happens if you want to convey some idea and you're not very good at grammar, right? Even if your grammar is kind of shaky, if you say ir Roma semana próxima, just 4 words without necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty of verb conjugation and whatnot, then you get your idea across. And this goes to show that even if your grammar is shaky, even if your pronunciation is not perfect, if you use keywords or can recognize keywords, communication still happens. Hence, and this is the reason why I think this statement is quite true. At least this has been my experience, and that of many learners and students I've been coaching and helping.
Let's start with how your brain actually forms and retains memories of words. It's called the forgetting curve, and it shows you how quickly we forget new information if we don't review it. Within just 24 hours, we typically forget about 70% of what we've learned. This is why writing a word 100 times in one sitting or cramming vocabulary before a test works for that specific test, but it won't develop your language skills.
This is quite true. Ebbinghaus is a very nice dude and is a German psychologist actually, who lived in the second part of the 19th century. And he experimented with nonsensical syllables because he wanted to avoid this emotional, connection and a burden that some words have and that Till was referring to at the beginning, for example, curse words. And he experimented for a long time and he got to the conclusion that yes, we tend to forget very quickly. But I think the most important point here is the fact that cramming is not very useful unless you want to pass a test. But if you think about it, if you want to learn something for life and you want to retain and acquire a skill for life, like language learning, you want to do it every single day because regularity and frequency counts more than intensity. And if you combine intensity and frequency, meaning you do sit down and learn every day and you do it for 30, 45, 60 minutes or even 2 hours a day, then that has an incredible effect over time, a compound effect, so to speak. But here, the main question is we tend to forget things very quickly, so why not do this every single day so that we add novelty and repetition to our vocabulary acquisition?
It simply doesn't work long term. Your brain doesn't form strong connections through this kind of intensive, isolated practice. Instead, it needs spaced repetition, encountering a word multiple times over larger increasing intervals.
This is the other key concept of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, meaning that if you see a word, let's say on day 0 or day 1, and then you review it or see it again, maybe in another context, or because you review the same piece of information where you found that word, you see it 2 days later, and then 4 days later, and then 8 days later, then your brain is bound to remember it better. And this is how a lot of SRS systems, space-time repetition systems, are built upon. This is a very important principle of these growing intervals of time and reviewing. Anki, as an example of that, flashcards, etc., are all built upon this concept.
But here's where it gets interesting. Not all words follow this forgetting curve equally. Some words stick much better than others, and it's not random. Let me give you an example from my Japanese learning. Among other tools, I'm using the popular Core 2.3 KDEC in Anki to build some base vocabulary. Anki is great for this spaced repetition approach, because its algorithm will show you cards at the right moment and you don't need to think about when to review a word. One problem I keep running into though is that very early on it throws different kanji combinations at you that all essentially mean the same thing. I totally lack the nuance to know when to use which one. And I won't learn that nuance either by repeating these words in isolation over and over again. The only way to truly understand the differences between these words is by seeing them in new and different contexts.
This is an important point as well. I think that flashcards can be useful, but the main point is always to consume input, a lot of input that is natural, and to learn the language organically, because if you do that, you're bound to see a lot of the most frequent words again and again. And that's the only issue I have with flashcards, is that even if you create, let's say, embed a given word or expression in a sentence, it's still just one sentence. While if you keep reading, you will see a word within a sentence, that sentence within a paragraph, and that paragraph within an entire piece of content. And your mind need a lot of backlinks, so it need a lot of connections. If you do that, you're bound to build a lot of backlinks in your head. The concept of backlinks is explored in this Learning How to Learn book by Barbara Oakley, who's fantastic. She's the founder of the Learning How to Learn Coursera, one of the the biggest and most beautiful courses about learning how to learn, and I highly recommend you watch it. But the bottom line is building backlinks. You do it efficiently when you see things in context, and this does not just concern language learning. It is just the way our brain learns.
So this isolation of words is something I really don't like about flashcard apps like Anki. And I'll probably quit it sooner rather than later and focus completely on input-based learning.
So my point here is that when I made a video about Anki that some people disliked, I think that Anki is not necessarily bad per se, Anki or flashcards in general. I think that to use what I call the cake metaphor, I think that language learning, efficient language learning or language acquisition happens when you get massive input. That's the base. And I see it as building a cake, right? Or cooking or making a cake. And the icing on the cake is using flashcards or using deliberate activities like, again, flashcards, or recalling certain information, certain pieces of information, or doing certain deliberate exercises. But that happens on top of input, which is the foundation of language acquisition.
Yes, each flashcard gives me a sample sentence, but let's be real, I'm just learning the word itself, not its usage. That said, this phase might be necessary, especially for a language like Japanese. Without learning these kanji combinations, I won't be able to read even beginner material, which would severely limit my input options to audio only.
Yeah, I think that the point here that Till makes is that you can do both, right? You can use flashcards at the beginning, or you can use flashcards down the line, depending on the language, depending on your learning path. But as I always say, it's not this or that, it's this and that if you want to use flashcards or other systems that shore up the efficiency of your learning. Again, language learning is a personal road, and we always have to use the tools, and the way we use the tools depends on us, depends on our solutions. It's always about experimenting, finding a solution. Does this work? Great. Then I'll double down on that. This doesn't work? Well, maybe I'll discard it and I'll try something different.
This goes both ways, by the way. I definitely haven't discovered all these 643 uses of verbs like echar. Some Spanish words can seemingly mean absolutely anything and everything. And to really understand their usage, only lots of varied input will help.
This is another very important point. I still remember when I was leafing through these, I think it was a phrasal verb book back in the day when I had started learning English. And I remember that there were so many connotations and meanings of the word get. And on top of that, you had phrasal verbs connected with that. Get away, get down with, get up, get off. And there were so many. And I think that while you can explore them, for example, you leaf through the dictionary and you try to remember, I think the best way to remember them is just, once again, to consume a lot of content. And if you consume a lot of content, that is books, graded readers, you watch movies, everything that is connected with inputs, then you will naturally pick up these words in context. Then if you want to use flashcards, that's fine.
So what makes words actually stick? Let's look at several factors here. First is context, which we are already talking about. Your brain forms much stronger connections when a word is surrounded by meaningful context rather than sitting in isolation. This is why getting lots of input is actually natural spaced repetition. Languages have spaced repetition baked into them.
How do you retain vocabulary without using some sort of spaced repetition system? Just studying the language is spaced repetition, if that makes sense. I see, so you sort of rely on watching an input as a way of seeing words repeatedly. Yeah, like if the word's important, it's going to pop up a lot, If the word is not important, then I'll learn it when I want to or something. If it's some shit like, there's so many words like, here, I'll watch a little. These words are all pretty common, so you'll learn these.
Gutes Frühstück, also mein Partner und ich machen immer dann
all these words are going to pop up very often.
Ausgiebigen Brunch.
Maybe this adjective isn't going to pop up very often, but it's interesting, so I might remember it, because I'm like, ausgiebig, like extensive, that's kind of cool. I'm trying to give you examples.
An manchen Wochenenden wird dann die Familie besucht.
Again, these are all very common words, so they're going to appear all the time if I listen to watch German videos a lot. You don't need spaced repetition because the language itself is spaced repetition. Very smart. Yeah, that was deep, yo. That was deep. Don't let someone fucking steal that, dude. I'll be pissed. That's like my quote, okay?
So, this is a very, very, very important point. Language simp is right. Till is also right in showing this. And my point is that if you consume content, once again, language learning is simple at its core, but it's not easy to implement. If you consume a lot of content, what is going to happen is that your brain is going to get exposed to a lot of words. Now, the interesting part about this is that there is something called Zipp's law, which I explored in another reaction video that Till made. Watch that one. It's going to be somewhere here on screen. This is a very important point because spaced repetition is already embedded in the language itself. And what does this mean? Well, it means basically that according to Zipp's law, a guy called Zipf, and I explore this concept in another reaction video to one of Till's wonderful videos, is that the frequency of words decreases exponentially. So the most frequent word is up there, and then you have the second most frequent word, which is half as frequent as the first, and then the third is half as frequent as the second, etc., etc. This means that when you explore language in general, when you consume a lot of content, you're bound to stumble upon the most frequent words most of the time. If you, for example, consume podcasts or consume videos, but then it gets more and more difficult. For example, when you're reading novels or nonfiction books. So you have to expose yourself in a language, of course, and that's the main law, but then you have to expose yourself in a language in a smart way so that you consume content where you're bound to see these words. It can be for example, if you're a beginner, language learning material for beginners, which contain the most frequent words, then you move on to podcasts and videos, graded readers, and then books. But the concept is always the same. If you consume a lot of content, you're bound to see these words over and over across different contexts, and your brain is going to pick them up naturally and organically, which is at the base of efficient language acquisition.
When you encounter words naturally through input, you're not just seeing the word. You're seeing how it's used, what it connects to, what situation it appears in. This makes it much easier to understand the word fully and to remember it.
This is another great concept. And if you want to know more about this, you can read, for example, there's a wonderful book which is called How to Learn Vocabulary in a Foreign Language by Paul Nation. Paul Nation is one of the leading figures in vocabulary acquisition and retention and whatnot. And if you look him up, he's also has, for example, vocabulary test. There's a lot of interesting things that he has done over the course of the last 20 years. So look him up. Very interesting stuff.
That's why I built Lengia differently from other language learning apps. Instead of traditional flashcard repetition, which you can still do, it uses a context-based spaced repetition system, something I honestly haven't seen anywhere else. Words you need to review naturally appear in new stories generated for you, or in articles you want to read or listen to that get simplified to your level. This way, you're always seeing words in fresh, meaningful context, not just in isolation or with the same phrase. This goes beyond pure memorization and lets you really acquire the language naturally. Emotional connection can also help a lot to make new vocabulary stick.
So after making the first reaction video to one of Till's videos, we actually connected, and Till asked me, hey, do you want to try Lengia? I tried it. I love it. I think it's one of the best tools because it packages everything together, and all the stuff that he's saying are packaged in this app, this platform that he's created, and we decided to collaborate. If you want to give it a try, just click on the link below. It's an affiliate link, but it's really worth it. I've been using it extensively now, and I love it, you know? So I just promote good stuff, and this is definitely good stuff.
There's a reason why curse words are often the first words we learn. They carry emotional weight. When you learn a word through a funny moment, an embarrassing situation, or an exciting conversation, it's much more likely to stick than when you learn it from a vocabulary list with a random phrase and random picture attached to it. I know
this is another big thing. We tend to learn vocabulary much better in real life when we interact with other human beings. That kind of reminds me of some things that happened in the past, in particular one in Polish, and I'll also tell you about something else that happened to a friend of mine. So the one thing that happened in Polish is that a few years ago we went on vacation na Kaszubach, which is a region in Poland, in northern Poland, and I was with a couple of Polish friends, and then unexpectedly, actually the Airbnb was a little bit run down, like peeling walls, you know, just like it was very dirty, and the whole charade, the whole deal. And I said something along the lines of, ale tutaj jest, wszystko jest zajebane. And then one of the girls looked at me and said, co chcesz powiedzieć? Zajebane? Być może chcesz powiedzieć zaniedbane. To zaniedbane to znaczy, że nikt tu od dawna nie sprzątał i wygląda na to, że zrobili być może imprezę stulecia i zostawili bałagan, or something along the lines. Basically, she said, did you mean like zaniedbany means like run down instead of fucked up? And that was fun. I still remember it to this day. And the other one is a friend of mine at the conference interpreting school, and he told me, I recount the story because it's so funny. He was in Paris, and he was ordering a steak, and he said, est-ce que je peux avoir des salopes, s'il vous plaît? So he said basically, may I have some hookers, please, instead of saying, est-ce que je peux avoir des escalopes? So some steaks. And these things stay, right? Because they carry a lot of emotional, kind of an emotional attachment to an emotional burden. And emotions play a big role in language acquisition and vocabulary acquisition, for that matter.
That to me, the familiarity with sound patterns plays a huge role. When I started learning Japanese, some words' sound pattern was completely foreign to my German-English trained ear. These words were much harder to remember. There's also a big difference between passive and active vocabulary. You might recognize a word perfectly when reading or listening, but struggle to use it in conversation. This is completely normal. Active vocabulary is always smaller than passive vocabulary, even in your native.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. Some people told me, for example, Luca, how can I activate my vocabulary? But sometimes it's just normal that you don't know certain words, and for example, I've been reading a book in Polish, and some words were really alien, some parts of boat, etc. I will never use these words. So I think you should learn to use the words that are useful to you. And that goes for your native language as well, as Till is saying right now.
Language. To make vocabulary stick forever and move it into your active vocabulary, you need to actually use it in conversations or writing, which directly leads me to the first practical tip. Create your own sentences. Instead of relying purely on pre-made examples, make your own ones and make sure they're ones you would use in real life. For example, when learning the word toilet in a new language, figure out how to say, "Where is the toilet?" That's way more useful than "the toilet is white." Either make the sentence personal and relevant to you, or make them absurd. Maybe
this is a great point, and I would even add that not only making your own sentence, but also writing them down. I can show you here because I have it. I use this all the time. I use these small notebooks because I think that, writing your own sentences is powerful. But if you even on top of that, you write them by hand, that you write them on something you like that little piece of technology, then things warm up pretty quickly when it comes to remembering vocabulary, because you're personalizing things. You're making it like a real life object that you can see, you can leaf through, you can even smell, and that is connected with your own sentences. This is very powerful. And a lot of people went fully digital, but I think that paper still plays a huge role. My colleagues, by the way, call me Don Papel, jokingly, a paper guy.
You're learning the word fat, and well, your cat is a chunky boy.
This cat looks like the one cat I had when I was 10, just identical, a little bit, not as choppy, but it's really striking.
So you know what sentence to make, and it will stay with you. Or just think of a mom joke. Getting creative here does not only help a lot and activate the word much stronger because you're engaging with it, it's also pretty fun. This becomes even more important with more abstract words. It's often relatively easy to memorize concrete words like manzana because you can picture what an apple looks like or even what it tastes like. But abstract concepts are often much harder to deal with. Personal sentences can really shine here. Take the Spanish word aunque. It's an important conjunction, but pretty abstract. Instead of memorizing its definition or direct translation, you can simply come up with an example sentence that applies to you. For example, I could say, aunque soy alemán, hablo español. Now the word is tied to something personal and meaningful, rather than just floating around as an abstract concept.
Yeah, this is another very, very important concept, is to make it personal and to add emotions. Anything that you can add, anything that is familiar, context, etc., adds to the capacity of your brain to create, once again, backlinks and to make that new word or expression or whatnot fit in the architecture, the language architecture that you're building along the way.
The personal or absurd method is even used by memory champions. You know, those guys who can memorize a deck of cards within a minute and much crazier stuff. The World Memory Championship is less a test of memory than of creativity. The crazier, the better. I can recommend his book Moonwalking with Einstein as well. Even the title encapsulates this whole idea. However, while these memory techniques can be useful to some vocabulary, they're not necessarily the best tool to language learning as a whole. Creating elaborate memory palaces for every word you want to learn would be exhausting and impractical. Plus, it misses the most important aspect we talked about earlier, which is context and natural use.
That's absolutely correct. Memory techniques are great. I've tried a few of them to, for example, memorize certain things, memorize a story, memorize, for example, pieces of a speech, the main points of a speech. You can use the memory palace, and you can leverage the fact that the brain does not remember facts that well, but remembers images, recognizes and remembers images that better. So you can encode these facts or numbers into images, and it's crazy what you can actually do. But when it comes to speaking a foreign language, actually, I think this gets in the way. If you want to remember certain words, you can, but the fact is that speaking a language is something handled by your procedural memory, while and speaking while trying to remember memory palaces and whatnot is really difficult to do. So I would not use memory techniques to speak foreign languages, but if by any chance you've used them and that worked for you, that's great.
This brings us back to consistency and spaced repetition. If you're taking a language class for an hour once or twice per week, I very much doubt you will make significant progress unless you engage with the language almost daily outside of class. Your brain needs regular exposure to form lasting connections. This is also why extensive exposure is better than intensive study sessions. Reading 10 pages daily across the week will serve you better than reading 70 pages in one sitting.
This is absolutely correct, and it's also one of the reasons why I think language learning does not work at school. One of the many factors. For example, back in the day in middle school, I had one lesson on Tuesday, I think it was English, and then the other one is on Thursday. It's the same thing for French. And of course, if you do not do homework and if you don't get exposed to the language during in your life, that's not going to cut it. It's not going to work. One of the reasons why I started getting better and better and better in English and French those years was because I started exposing myself to the language, especially with movies in both languages, every single day. Every single day I sit down. For example, in the afternoon, I did 30 to 45 minutes of watching a movie in English, and then every night I watched something in French. And then after a year, I got fluent in both languages in that fateful year of 1994 and then 1995, because I was exposed to the language every single day. So this is really what matters, is frequency. If you do it every single day, then at night, what happens is your brain, especially the hippocampus, transfers the information into the cortex, and it's better to learn 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, rather than, feeling guilty on Saturday because you have been slacking the whole week and then try to catch up.
To keep your consistency, it's important that you find your right level of difficulty. If you study flashcards, don't do 100 new ones per day. You will just burn out. And with your input, find material that is slightly above your level and, most importantly, interesting to you. We want to spend most of the time in the zone of proximal development, where the material is challenging enough to learn from, but not too difficult so that it becomes frustrating. I try to bake this into
This is another very, very important concept, the concept of the Goldilocks zone, or the zone of proximal development, and that goes for every part of language learning. You have to find yourself always, constantly, and it's a moving target, by the way, a moving window, in a zone where something is not too difficult and it's not too easy. In the case of reading, for example, you have to find yourself, if you're a beginner, you have to consume content possibly that is for beginners. If you are an intermediate learner, using podcasts and videos is great, but you have to think about the length, you have to think about the density of the words, the kind of material, and then about reading in general. There's a lot of people who use graded readers because graded readers allow you to stay within your comfort zone when you have a B1 level, for example, but you still want to read. Reading is difficult, especially when it comes to reading content aimed at native speakers like novels or nonfiction books. And then, of course, when you venture into uncharted territory, that is novels and nonfiction books and books in general, that is tough, and you have to find yourself in this zone. It's not easy when it comes to reading, but it's definitely possible. The important thing is to do it step by step.
Gear as well, and continuously improve it. You can set how challenging you want your content to be, plus you can focus on specific aspects you want to improve, like certain tenses or vocabulary themes. This works great once you reached a low intermediate level. If you're a complete beginner, it's probably not the best tool for you yet.
Yeah, this is great, and it's a very honest thing to say, because if you want to go through, for example, podcasts, the ideal level is when you have an A2, B1, depending on, of course, on the nature of the podcast. But this kind of podcast you can create. I've been doing this. I've been using, for example, Lingua for a bit, and definitely it's great for my Turkish. Still a little bit difficult because the texts are still a little bit outside of my comfort zone. But it's definitely great because you find yourself in this zone where you're learning things and it gets exciting, and then you have to do it for quite a long time before you get over the hump, so to speak, and are able to enjoy books and stuff that is aimed at native speakers.
As you start to progress, you can also start to learn your target language in your target language. Sounds a bit weird, but it makes a lot of sense. If you're learning Spanish, for example, your flashcards could be Spanish to Spanish, not Spanish to English, with relating concepts and definitions on the back of the card. This helps you build stronger connections within the language itself through synonyms and context, rather than always routing through your native language. So to round this up, you should use monolingual dictionaries more than translators.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that I disagree with this, but I've never really used dictionaries. I did back in the day, but I don't think I remember the last time I used a dictionary, maybe 20 years ago. I always make sure that I have bilingual version of whatever I consume. If I have a high level, that is not necessary anymore, but in general, I do this quite often, and I use just a version in English or in another language I know well, namely Italian, and just for reference. You can use a monolingual dictionary, but I think that kind of slows you down, because if you use a bilingual version, you can easily see the word in context, because as of now, translators and AI in general is really good at giving you the right connotation, the right meaning within that context. So you can use it. Again, you have to do what you like, whatever floats your boat, as they say, but I don't see the necessity of using monolingual dictionaries. I would just expose myself to more and more content.
You can start with bilingual resources, but as soon as you can understand basic definitions, switch to a learner's dictionary in your target language. The definitions there are usually written with simpler vocabulary, making them perfect for this transition phase. Let me give you some bonus tips for some specific type of words. Cognates are your friends. Cognates are words that look similar across languages. For example, information and información. Train yourself to spot these patterns and you get instant vocabulary.
That is quite true for languages that are very similar to your native language. In particular, English and other European languages, there are so many words that are similar, but you also have to be aware of the so-called false friends. So there's a lot of words that look like that they're almost the same in the same language, but they can mean different things that can lead to some embarrassment moments if you don't use them properly.
The concept of language transfer is very powerful and useful here, and I'll make a video about that in the future. But if you can't wait, just Google it. With compound words, it's useful to understand the components. In German, Krankenhaus is literally sick house. Once you know this pattern, many compound words become easier to remember and give you sort of bonus vocabulary in case you didn't know one of the components beforehand. Another example would be Fahrzeug in Germany, which is literally just driving thing. And I noticed that this pattern also exists in Japanese. Food is eat thing, drink is drink thing, and an animal is of course a move thing. So if there is some magic trick to remembering vocabulary, it's to engage with the language in a more meaningful and personal way.
Okay, so first of all, I would say that what he said, it just hit the nail on the head. If you are able to identify the single pieces and components of the language, then you are able to basically learn, let's say, 3 words for the price of 3. For example, just to give an example, right? In German, you say Fahrzeug, Fahrzeuge, but in Hungarian or Turkish, you have a lot of these compound words in every language, but particularly in Hungarian and Turkish. For example, you can say számítógép. Számítógép means basically number, device, or gözlük. Gözlük means eye. Lük stands for, it's a particle that stands for suffix that stands for device, eye device, glasses. So if you're able to dissect words and see the single components, you're learning more words, and most of all, you remember them. It's like Lego pieces that you see, across the board.
So if there is some magic trick to remembering vocabulary, it's to engage with the language in a more meaningful and personal way, consistently and in actual context.
That is probably the most important sentence of the entire video, and that goes for language learning in general. Language learning is simple at its core. Have fun. Do it every single day. Do it in a way that feels personal and enjoyable, and the magic is going to happen. All right. So, what did I think about the whole video? Well, let me say this. I absolutely love the fact that Till takes the time to package solid research-backed insights, but most of all, that his advice is just so practical. It's something you can actually use right here and right now. Now, if there's one single lesson I want you to walk away with from this video, is that the method that works to learn vocabulary is the one you actually follow. And in order to follow it, you have to find it rewarding and you have to find it enjoyable. That may sound simple, but it's huge because it reminds us of the most important thing. There are no perfect methods, only the ones that are right for you. And that is where flexibility and experimentation come in. That's how you find what really truly works. Do you like flashcards? Do that. Do you like reading books or graded readers? Fantastic. Just double down on what you like and discard the rest. If Till's message resonated with you, and if you enjoyed this reaction video, I've got something for you that I think you're going to love. It's my free workbook, Acquire Vocabulary in 5 Simple Steps. click the pinned comment or check the description box below to grab it and start applying what you learned today. Also, if you're very, very serious about improving your vocabulary with tools that actually help, definitely check out Linguia. I use it, I love it, and yes, it's an affiliate link. That means that if you try it, you also support this channel. Oh, and one last thing. If you enjoyed this video and you like Till's style as much as I do, you will probably love another reaction video I did to one of his other videos. That's one about reading effectively in a foreign language. You can find it somewhere around here. Don't miss it. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, happy language learning, and I will see you in the next video.